It seems that no matter how much we try and control our lives, things we don't expect seem to happen all around us. Questions from our past haunt us. Creatures that stalk the woods hear us when we venture into their territory. And older, eviler things haunt our steps when we least expect it. Here are 4 stories of people who are beset by evils that they don't understand. Each of them can do little but hope to survive their encounters with the evil that they find on Worchester Street. Welcome, and I hope you enjoy your stay. Story number 1, The Woman in Black. Entry 1, Friday, 4:30 p.m. Just my luck that I'd have to deal with this rundown house on top of everything else on my plate. When the lawyer called me saying my aunt had left me this house out in the middle of nowhere, I almost refused the offer. Now that I'm sitting inside it, I wish I had. I'm on the couch in the living room right now, listening to the drip of the rusty pipes and the creak of the walls as the house shifts in the breeze. The entire place gives me the creeps, and the dozens of Catholic pictures and candles covering the walls do nothing to assuage the feeling. I don't know why my aunt would leave it to me, of all people. I'd only met her once in my entire life, after all. Well, I have some idea. When my dad passed away, I was probably her last living blood relative. So she probably looked around and knew no one, so she put me down as the inheritor of her incredible fortune. What a joke. $328 and a house that'll cost me more in property taxes than it's worth on the market. I have my psychology dissertation to prepare for, and I just don't have an extra 10 hours a week to deal with all this. Well, at least I have a place to stay rent-free for a few weeks while I work through selling the property. Entry 2, Saturday, 6 p.m. I pulled down most of the more bizarre religious images in the house today, and started deep cleaning, only to give up after a few hours. This place needs everything replaced. I might just schedule it for demolition, who knows. The house sits a little under a mile from the highway, and I have to walk along the road for about 10 minutes to get up here each time. I could open up the gate and drive, but the road leading up here is made of dirt and gravel. I'm worried about the possibility of getting my car stuck if I try driving it up here, or even worse, scratched. I recorded some of the walk up to the house for my records, and to show any potential buyers, and that's what you've been seeing. Entry 3, Sunday, 11:30 a.m. I think there's an animal problem in this area. Late last night, I heard something knocking at my door. It couldn't be a person, I'm way too far away from the road. When I answered the door, there was nothing there. Soon after, I started hearing tapping noises on my window. It's gotta be something like a raccoon, or worst case, a bear. I had made some pizza in the oven that night, and they probably just smelled it. Probably. I found my aunt's journal in a drawer. It was hard to read because she kept interrupting herself to reference Bible verses. I think she must have had paranoid schizophrenia because she kept referring to verses about protection from evil. She kept rambling on about how she thought she shouldn't leave the house and stuff like that. It's fascinating how the human mind can just fabricate situations like my aunt's. Apparently, she thought that plastering the walls with religious imagery and candles would protect her from some evil force that was after her. Maybe I should find a way to reference it in my dissertation. I wonder if the thesis community would go for that. Entry 4, Sunday, 11 p.m. I saw something outside. I think. I'm writing this from my bed, and my heart is still beating pretty fast. I had opened my front door to throw a bag of trash out, and I saw a figure standing on a hill 100 feet away. It was dark, but I'm sure I saw it. It looked like the silhouette of a woman dressed all in black. She was facing my direction. When it was clear that I had noticed her, she turned around and walked away. What in the world is going on? Why would this woman come all the way out here? Entry 5, Sunday, 3:47 a.m. I think she knew I didn't know about her. She knew I had torn down most of the pictures. She knew something that I didn't know. She came into the house. I woke up to the sound of my front door swinging open violently. I thought it might have been the wind, but the back of my mind flashed to the woman from earlier. I had grabbed my phone to use as a light, but accidentally double-tapped the home button, which opened my camera app. I stumbled into the hallway of the house and walked towards the door. I squeezed the picture button to light up the room with the flash, and saw her for the split second. She was standing in the doorway of the house, head cocked to the side and grinning like a madwoman. She started shambling towards me. I stumbled back and ran out of the back of the house. I ran down the road back to my car, cutting my bare feet on the thorns and rocks, and drove until I reached my friend's place, where I'm typing this, still in my sweatpants. I still have the picture I took of her. If you really want to see what I saw that night, I'll show it to you. Here it is. I'm not going back to that house. Whatever that thing was, I don't want anyone to go near that land ever again.
Story number 2. The Behemoth by the Barbershop.
The behemoth was standing on the street corner beneath the barbershop sign, its naked belly slick with the blood of the last person to walk by. One of the arms sticking out of the behemoth's neck was scratching its back lazily. A dozen bodies lay around its feet, some still breathing. It stared out at nothing, its eyes sightless and stupid. I was watching it intently, looking for any sign that it was going to change position again, when my concentration was broken by the waitress. "Would you like some more coffee, sir?" she asked. I'd been sitting in the cafe for over an hour, watching as the behemoth picked up the occasional bystander, tore off bits from them, then let them drop down again. I turned my attention to the waitress. I knew it would be useless to try, but I figured I'd give it yet another shot. "Yeah, that'd be great," I said. "Hey, would you do me a favor? Look out that window and tell me what you see." The waitress raised an eyebrow, but did what I asked. "What do you mean? The barbershop, the bookstore, the street sign?" She trailed off, obviously not understanding what I meant. I nodded. Right, of course. I'll take the check instead, actually." She left to grab it for me, and I turned my attention back out the window. An older man was walking past the behemoth. It reached down with 3 of its arms. It picked him up, tore an arm off, and let him fall back to the ground. The man got to his feet and started walking down the street towards me. I jumped up and ran out the door, grabbing him as he passed by. He was bleeding profusely from where his arm had been. "Hey, your arm is missing. You need—" I began. He looked at me as if I was crazy and cut me off. "Yeah, I know. I lost it in an accident. What's it to you?" I looked at him in disbelief. "You're bleeding. If you don't get help, you'll die. It's an old injury that acts up sometimes. Why don't you mind your own business, pal?" He pushed me away with his good hand and started walking down the street again. He didn't make it a dozen steps before he collapsed onto the pavement. The passersby stepped over him as if he wasn't even there. "Sir, you need to pay for your food," the waitress called to me from the building. I walked back into the cafe and had to run my card. Still worked, of course. I kept an eye on the behemoth as I stepped out of the cafe. When I turned back around, I saw a woman kneeling down next to the armless man. She was checking for a pulse. I ran up to her. "Can you see it?" I choked out. She looked up at me in disbelief. "Glenn? What? Can you?" she asked. It took everything I had in me not to tackle her in relief. I realized that I knew her, Sally Bridgewater. We went to high school together some 5 years back. She had short blonde hair and serious eyes. I knelt down next to the man. "He couldn't," I said. Even after it got him, he couldn't see it. Sally sat down hard on the curb and gave a short, choked laugh. "You have no idea how good it is to hear I'm not crazy. I think I have a pretty good idea, actually," I said. "I haven't seen anyone else who knows about them. Have you?" "One other guy. It was the day this all started. So, 3 weeks ago? He brought out a gun and shot at that thing." She pointed at the behemoth standing motionless on the street. "The gun didn't seem to do any damage at all." She put her face in her hands. "It charged him and just tore him apart." I nodded. I had seen the gun earlier among the bodies at the behemoth's feet. I grabbed Sally's shoulder. "Let's get out of here and talk." We started walking towards my place, avoiding the other 2 behemoths in town. "What do you know about the wall?" I asked. "What wall?" "Have you not tried leaving town to get help?" I asked incredulously. "What's the point? The town is here and the problem is here." She sounded defensive. I looked at her for a long moment. "Fine, I'll just show it to you then." We walked for a while in silence. The normal bustle of the neighborhoods around us seemed disturbing. People were still mowing their lawns and sending their kids to school like nothing out of the ordinary was happening. I spoke low. When this whole thing started, I tried everything I could to convince my friends that what I saw was actually happening, but they either refused to see it or just couldn't. I didn't. Everyone I tried to convince thought I was crazy, so I stopped trying, she said. I shook my head. Well, I did everything. It's like people are convincing themselves that nothing is wrong, or some part of their brain is at least. We talked about what we'd seen for a while until we reached my house and jumped into my car. I drove us to the edge of town and stopped there where a line in the dirt curved across the road. I put the car in park and ran up to the wall, rapping my knuckles on the air. It made a muffled tapping sound, as if it was made of stone. I tried leaving after the second day. Luckily for me, I saw a tree fall against it before I ran my car into it. The branches were all twisted like they were being pushed against something. Sally looked at me sideways, confused. There's no wall there. Well, that's what I'm trying to tell you. It's invisible, I said. Here, push your hand against... Glenn, you're worrying me. There's no wall in front of you. My stomach dropped. It was the same response my friends had given me when I'd tried showing them the behemoth. But, Sally, you see the behemoth, right? She shook her head in confusion. Of course I do. which is why I don't know why you're wasting time with this. I had an idea. Sally, please just humor me for a second, okay? I said. She sighed, and I noticed the lines of exhaustion around her eyes. Fine, she said. I put her so her back was to the wall, then stood in front of her so we were face to face. Just mirror me, okay? I said. I moved to my right, and she followed me. I took a step forwards, and she did the same. When I took 2 steps back, she bumped her head against the wall, hard enough that she yelped and threw her hands up to rub the spot. Okay, Sally, why didn't you take your second step back? I said. Because I didn't want to. This game is a waste of time. I sat down with my back to the wall and motioned for Sally to do the same. Sally, I'm gonna try and get you to believe something you know is wrong, okay? She rolled her eyes, but nodded. You know how you can see the creatures in town, but no one else can? Sally nodded again, clearly getting more and more annoyed. The same way that you can see those things when no one else can, I can perceive a wall here. The same way you were trying to convince your friends and family about the creature, I'm trying to convince you about this. Her eyes widened. You're not joking with me. Why would I joke about this? She ran her fingers through her hair. So you're saying there's an invisible wall near here? Sally, we're both leaning against it. She looked behind herself. You're really not just joking with me. Try and push your hand 2 feet that way, I pointed. She did, and her fingers splayed against the wall. I don't feel any resistance at all, she said. Well, why are your fingers like that? I pointed to her hand. I don't know. She pulled her hand away and stared at me. I guess you'll have to take my word for it then. I think we should try and break it somehow. It took some convincing, but I managed to get Sally to agree to a plan. We were going to rent a truck from the local U-Haul and rig it to run into the wall. I figured it might be enough to break whatever it was made of. If it was impervious to that or whatever else, I was out of luck anyway. May as well try. There was a road that angled straight into the wall just south of town. On top of that, near the wall was all farmland, so even if the truck went off-road, it'd still probably make a good contact with the wall. I made sure to pay the $20 and get the extra renter's insurance. I drove the truck to where we were going to make the attempt. I had a suspicion that Sally still didn't fully believe me about the wall, but I didn't see what else I could do to fix that. I had parked the truck beside the road and was rigging the gas pedal with a 2-liter of soda while Sally moved a few of the crashed cars from where they had piled up against the wall. A fog had been rolling into town all day, and by then Sally's outline was barely visible from where I was working on the truck. I finally rigged it about right when I heard a voice call out from behind me. Are you guys gonna try and run through the wall? I spun around. A young girl was standing there, no older than 10. Yeah, we are. You know about the wall? I asked. Yeah, but everyone else just tells me I'm crazy. She shrugged. I'm Jen. I live there. She pointed towards a farmhouse up the road. I rubbed my forehead. Right, well, Jen, have you been in town recently? Yeah, I go there every day for school. Have you seen anything weird there? Like another wall? No. Sally came back from where she'd pulled the Rex to the side of the road. I gestured towards the little girl. Little Jen here can see it too, I said. Sally raised an eyebrow but nodded. We finished rigging up the truck. I told Jen and Sally to get back, far out of the way. I pushed in the clutch, wedged the bottle in front of the accelerator, then put it in gear and finally let the clutch free. The truck lumbered along the road, slowly gaining speed until it was moving at a pretty good clip. It impacted the wall with enough speed for chunks of metal to fly off it in pieces. From where I stood, it looked like the wall hadn't budged an inch. I sighed and turned around to Sally and Jen. Well, that didn't work, I said. What should... I cut myself off when I saw their faces. They were looking above and behind me. Their faces were twisted into the most hideous expressions of fear that I'd ever seen. I spun around and looked into the fog, but didn't see anything. I shot a look back at the girls. It's like a spider, Jen said, still staring behind me. Sally grabbed Jen and pushed her into a ditch beside the road, then threw herself into it. I stood looking dumbfounded at the two of them. Then I was lifted into the air some 20 feet. Maybe I walked up a ladder, or maybe somebody had tied a rope to me when I wasn't paying attention. I'm not sure. All I know is my old leg injury started acting up again. The next thing I knew, I was back on the grass, feeling some bruising from when I'd crashed my car into the wall last week. I was feeling pretty tired, so I fell asleep. When I woke up, I was in a house I didn't recognize, next to Sally and Jen. Jen was sobbing pretty bad. I was out of it by then, but I'm pretty sure I heard her say something about her house. Sally had tied something to my leg, and I was pretty annoyed at that. Didn't she know it was a delicate injury? They could have messed something up. Anyway, the plan to break the wall was a failure. I'll have to think of something else. This town is full of blind sheep, and it's up to me to save them.
Story number 3. The tapping from the mirror.
I heard the sound of tapping on glass. I thought it was from the basement window, until I heard it come from the mirror again. I was standing in the damp basement, holding the picture loosely in my hand, my mouth dry. Sam stood at the top of the stairs, motioning furiously for me to leave. I turned my attention to the table in the corner. On top of it sat an ornate vanity mirror half covered by a dusty sheet. The tapping rang out from it again, sounding like fingernails on glass. I'm getting ahead of myself. If you want to understand what led me and Sam to that house, I need to start at the beginning. My mother and aunt both died when I was very young, leaving me and my cousin Sam orphaned. Apparently, all our family members disappeared into thin air after that, so we both grew up in the foster system here in West Virginia. To be brief, life growing up sucked. We were tossed around from home to home every few years, but we eventually got through it. Sam and I learned that we could only trust each other. Well, each other and our caseworker, Miss Montgomery. She'd always looked out for us when it was time to change houses, and if a foster home was getting particularly bad, I knew I could call her and she'd move heaven and earth to help us. Sam and I both decided to head to Marshall University once we graduated from high school. We'd been going there for a few semesters when I got a call out of the blue from Miss Montgomery. She told me that she'd been looking into my family again. I'd done some research on them myself in my teens, but I found absolutely nothing. My last name is Galloway, which isn't very common, but still, every search I made returned thousands of results that I didn't know how to sift through. With my past experience, I wasn't overly enthusiastic about Miss Montgomery's call. She told me that she found some records that matched everything we knew about my mom and aunt. I asked her what it was that she'd found, and she told me that there was some factory in a town nearby that had been owned by a man named Richard Galloway, who'd been recorded as having 2 daughters with my aunt and mom's name. Everything fit. I brought up the idea of checking out the factory with Sam when he came home from his classes that afternoon. "Come on, man," he said. "Even if we do have relatives, they abandoned us for 20 years. Why would you even want to meet them?" I shrugged. Maybe they didn't know about us. Maybe they have money. Maybe a lot of things. It took some convincing, but eventually Sam agreed to check the factory out. It was a few hours of driving, but eventually we reached the town. It was all but abandoned, full of shuttered factories and burnt down homes. I followed my phone's GPS to the factory that Miss Montgomery had mentioned and found that it was abandoned as well. I took a picture of the factory door, which you can see here. Sam looked at me with a raised eyebrow. "Well, it looks like we drove all this way for nothing." "Oh no," I said. "We're going in for sure." "Do you want to get arrested again?" Sam said. "You'll get kicked out of college, you know." "We won't get arrested," I said with a grin. "Besides, this factory is ours by birthright. We'd just be breaking one of our own windows." Sam shook his head, but followed me as I walked behind the factory. I took another picture, which you can see here. Luckily, one of the doors behind the building was loose. It only took 2 good kicks for it to break and fall inside. The floor of the factory was littered with broken glass. I knelt down to take a closer look and saw that they weren't just pieces of glass, but bits of broken mirrors. Thousands of little pieces of mirror sparkled from where they lay on the ground. I saw a stack of frames sitting in a corner of the factory floor as well. "So, what is this, a mirror factory?" Sam asked. I shrugged. "Looks that way." We walked around the place. The high windows let in thick beams of sunlight that sparkled off the mirror pieces on the floor. We found a door along one wall of the building. I tried the handle and found it locked. I shot Sam a look and gestured towards the door. He rolled his eyes, but stepped up to the door and slammed his shoulder into it hard. The rusted hinges snapped, and the door fell into the room with a heavy thud, revealing an office with a large wooden desk. "Well, if there's anyone around to hear, they definitely heard that," he said. We reached the desk, and I opened the drawers. There were some office supplies, paper, stuff like that. Then, as my hand reached the back of the drawer, I felt a wet piece of paper. I pulled out my hand and saw I was holding an old letter. A letter addressed to a man named Richard Galloway. I didn't recognize the address. "Do you think that's where our grandpa lived?" Sam asked. He hadn't even finished his sentence when we heard it. A tapping noise, like fingernails on glass, echoed around the empty factory. I stuck my head out the office door and looked around to see what was making it, but everything looked the same. "Hey, I called out. The tapping stopped immediately. A feeling swept over me that I can't explain. You know that feeling you get when you get caught somewhere you know you shouldn't be? That mixture of sheepishness and shame? It was like a hostile version of that. We need to get out of here, I said. Then another sound started. A soft whipping noise, the kind of noise that you hear when you swing a thin branch through the air. It sounded like a person was standing in the middle of the factory, swinging a long stick through the air. Again, I saw no movement. Then the noise got louder and closer. "Time to go, Sam," I shouted and stuffed the letter into my pocket. The whipping got faster and more violent. As we bolted for the door, I saw a mirror hung on the wall shatter into a dozen pieces that crashed to the floor. They tinkled as they hit the ground. The whipping continued until we got out of the factory and into the car. We sped away, not knowing what to make of it. "What was that?" Sam shouted. It wasn't a question. I shook my head. "I don't know." Sam gripped the steering wheel hard, his knuckles white. I pulled out the letter that I'd taken from the desk and looked at the address again. Then I put the information into my phone's GPS and flipped it to show Sam. "The house is just an hour south of here in the mountains," I said quietly. I fought to keep my hands from shaking. "Are you crazy? Were you not just in that factory with me?" Sam asked. "There was something not right happening in there." A few minutes passed in silence. "Haven't you always wanted to know, Sam?" I asked. "Didn't it make you mad when we had to move again and again?" I sighed. "I want to know what happened to them, just so I can know if I should be spitting on their graves or not." Another long moment passed in silence. Sam shot a look at me and nodded, breathing out hard. "Fine. Where is this place?" The highway led into a valley, and soon we were snaking back and forth up an old country road. The day was winding down, and soon the twilight sun was hidden behind a layer of thick fog that covered the valley like a blanket. The road led us up the mountainside, finally ending at a house sitting on a hill. It was, without exaggeration, the most impressive structure I had ever seen in person. It was made of old brick and stone, and it looked like it was clinging to the side of the mountain with its fingernails. How has this thing not just fallen off into the valley? I thought out loud. I took a picture which you can see here. There was a plaque with a crest next to the door that read Galloway. I knocked on the front door and waited. The thick fog swirling around the house muted the normal sounds of the forest. The silence rang out, almost physical in its intensity. Sam and I stood in front of the doors and heard nothing. I reached for the handle and was surprised to find that the door opened smoothly. The inside of the house looked like it hadn't been visited in at least a decade. Several of the large windows that spanned the walls of the living room were broken, and a thick layer of dust covered every surface. I didn't notice them at first because of the dust, but soon I realized what I was seeing. Almost every surface of the room was covered in huge rectangular mirrors. Sam walked up to the fireplace that dominated one of the walls and picked up a picture frame that sat on top of it. He rubbed the dirt off and looked at it. His eyebrows shot up, and he looked up at me. "You were right," he whispered. I ran up to the picture and immediately recognized my mother and aunt with a man who I assumed was Richard. My mom was probably in her late teens. "So this place is really..." I trailed off. "I don't know," Sam said. His voice was thick with emotion. We walked around the house then, exploring the different rooms. It looked like it had been built at the turn of the last century, though only abandoned for a few years. We eventually found the basement of the house. It looked like it was a later addition and was made out of damp, mossy concrete. I walked down the steps to it, but Sam shook his head and said that he preferred to stay up top. An ornate vanity mirror half covered with a sheet sat on a table in the corner. There was also a bed and a small dresser. I walked up to the dresser and opened some drawers. They were all empty, except for the last. There was a single photograph laying in the drawer, face down. I picked it up, turned it over, and felt all the blood leave my face. It was a picture of my mom and aunt, with a young me and Sam sitting on their laps. Next to us in the picture was a shape that I didn't understand, a black silhouette of a woman hanging upside down in the air next to us. Somehow, the picture made the silhouette seem like it was moving violently. Here's a picture of that. That's when I heard the sound of tapping on glass. I thought it was from the basement window, until I heard it come from the mirror again. I turned my attention to the table in the corner. The tapping rang out clearly from the ornate vanity mirror, sounding like fingernails on glass. Every hair on my body stood up. I know you've heard that expression 1,000 times, but it's used because it's true. I felt like a dog whose hackles had risen. The methodical tapping slowly increased its intensity until it sounded like someone was drumming their fingernails on the mirror, hard. Sam motioned violently from the top of the stairs, but I was frozen where I stood. Then, the whipping noise from the factory rang out, and the mirror exploded into a dozen shards that scattered around the room. I ran up the stairs, still clutching the photo in my hand, and Sam and I sprinted for the front door. The sound of tapping echoed from every mirror throughout the house. It was followed by the methodical whip. We reached the living room. The front doors closed, and we ran for it. A thunderous crack rang out, and every mirror in the room shattered in unison, showering us with bits of broken glass and mirror. The whipping approached us from behind just as we reached the door. The sound was violent and fast. It sounded like a dozen people each had a supple stick that they were swinging back and forth as hard and fast as they could. We ran to the car and set off down the road as fast as we could. It's been a few days now, and I don't know what to think about what happened. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know how to get more information. If I find out anything else, I'll update you all here.
Story number 4. My dad did not kill my sister.
My hometown of Ferrisburg, Indiana, has always had a problem with crime. Not robberies or assaults, no, even minor arguments between neighbors are rare here. Ferrisburg's problem has always been with murder, and not just any murder. In Ferrisburg, parents kill their children at a rate more than 50 times the national average. Murder here has become just one of those things that people talk about, falling into the same kinds of conversations where you'd normally be asking about relatives or the football game last night. Nobody really knows why. Some say there's something in the water, some say the town is cursed, and some say that we just happen to have terrible parents here. That's what I thought, at least. Why else would a parent kill a child, even if they were suffering from some mental illness? There's no excuse for that. That is, until the police came to our house to arrest my dad. It was an open and shut case. Sarah, my little sister, had never come home from school. My parents immediately filed a missing persons report, and the police came to our house. 2 detectives with beady eyes and accusing glares. They asked to look around, and my parents obliged. They found all the evidence they needed in my dad's truck. The back seat was covered in Sarah's blood, and there were even a few zip ties with dead skin and hair. The detectives asked if anyone else had been near the truck that day. As soon as he answered no, he was taken away. But my dad did not kill my sister. My mom spent that night sobbing up in her room. I didn't. I went out to where his truck had been parked to look around. The truck had since been towed by the police, but the ground all around where it had been parked was still wet and soggy due to the rain that had come down the night before. I used my phone to look at the ground near the truck. I used my phone's light to look at the ground near the truck and saw a single set of footprints leading off into the woods. Small footprints, just like Sarah's. I followed the trail, occasionally losing it in the underbrush, only to pick it up again when the ground turned back to mud. The night was overcast, and the light coming from my phone was only barely enough to light up the trail. I walked for what must have been a few miles. Eventually, the trail ended at a clearing with a large 3-sided stone structure set in the open. I walked towards it, only to have my eyes drawn back down to the mud again. The small set of footprints were heading right for the structure. I approached the stone structure and tried recording on my phone, but my memory was full. I deleted a few apps to make room and started recording and walked into the building. You've been seeing the video that I took. As you can see, there were various random items scattered inside the place. Umbrellas, flowers, glass shards. I didn't understand the point of it. I tried recording everything I could, but my phone ran out of memory after just a few seconds. Inside a side room, I saw a diary sitting on a shelf. It was Sarah's. I opened it and flipped through it, stopping on a page that had a drawing. It was a drawing of what looked like a dog standing up on 2 legs, walking like a person. The diary said, "I met Mr. Oreo today. He's a nice dog, but he's really big. He talked to me when I was coming home from school. He said so many funny jokes and was so nice. He agreed with me that Janet can't have two best friends. I asked him why he walked like a person, but he just told me he didn't know. I flipped forward a few pages to the last entry in the diary. It said, Mr. Oreo was really mad at me today. I messed up. I told him I'd do it today, but I couldn't. I was in Dad's truck, but the knife looked too sharp. Mr. Oreo tells me it won't hurt, that the knife will feel like a nice massage on the back of my hand, and then we can run away together. When I told him I couldn't do it, he turned scary for a minute. He looked like he got really sick, really bad all of a sudden. I told him that I'd do it tomorrow, though, and then he looked better. That's when I heard a sound coming from outside the building, this deep, guttural growl echoing from the clearing. I stayed hidden in the side room, but I stuck my head out to watch for whatever was approaching. I saw a man dressed in dark clothes walking across the clearing in front of the structure. He was holding something long and thin in his hand, but I couldn't quite make out what it was. He stood still for a moment, then stalked off into the woods. I waited for a few minutes until I was sure he was gone, then started back towards home. When I passed by the spot where he stood, I noticed his prints in the mud. They weren't boot prints like I was expecting. No, the spot where he was standing was marked by a set of deep paw prints, looking to me the same as a wolf. I ran back to my house, Sarah's diary in my hand. I had no idea what to think. The journal wasn't exactly going to clear my dad all on its own, but it wasn't nothing either. I fell asleep uneasy, wondering what kind of animal could convince a little girl to do that to herself. I woke up the next morning for school, the uneasy feeling having only gotten worse. I got ready and left out my front door. When I shut it behind me, it felt strange under my fingers. I turned around to see that the entire door was covered in deep crisscrossing scratches. It looked like somebody had taken a key or screwdriver to the door. I froze. This had to be from whoever was responsible for taking Sarah. I tried to shake myself out of it and headed to school. I spent the rest of the day trying to think of an explanation for the things I'd seen. Maybe Sarah saw a person in a dog mask. Maybe there was a dog walking next to the man in the clearing I'd seen. Maybe a lot of things. I stayed late at school in the library. I didn't want to go home, where the kidnapper was apparently watching me. I spent the time browsing through different forums looking for answers. A few hours after the school day ended, the librarian came up to me to tell me it was time to head home. I wanted to get back to my place as soon as possible, so I cut through my school's gym. I was walking fast, with my eyes down on my phone, searching through a message board for similar stories to mine. I had my hand on the door and was about to push it open when I looked through the window. A creature was standing on the other side of the door, standing deathly still and staring at me through the window. I froze, just watching it in shock. Almost on autopilot, I pointed my phone at it and took a picture. Here it is. It raised a finger and pointed towards the door handle, as if to ask me to open it for him. I turned around and sprinted back towards the library. The librarian called the police, who brought me home where I am now. I don't know what to do now. It can track me. It knows where I live, and it has my sister. If anyone knows anything about this kind of creature, please tell me what I should do.
I hope you all enjoyed these stories. My goal is to support myself through my writing, so if you have the means and the desire, please support me on Patreon. Thank you for watching. And as always, I hope you've enjoyed your time on Worchester Street.